Hello, this is Mary from Arcus 7. Thank you all for attending today's event, Sustainably Bridging the Innovation Valley of Death in Agriculture, Animal Health, and Food Technology, brought to you in partnership with TechAccel. Before we begin, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. As you can see, at the bottom of your screen are multiple application widgets you can use. All the widgets are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to get the most out of your desktop space. If you have any questions during the event, you can submit them through the Q&A widget. We will try to answer as many as possible, but if a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, we'll make sure to follow up with you in a separate email after the event. A copy of today's slide deck and additional help materials are available in the resource list. We encourage you to download any resources or bookmark any links you may find useful. For the best viewing experience, we recommend using a wired internet connection and closing any programs or browser sessions running in the background. You can find additional answers to some common technical issues located in the Help widget at the bottom of your screen. A reminder to look out for an email within 2 hours after the event is done with links to download the slides and recording. And now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our panel moderator. Joining us today, we've got Michael Helmstetter. He's the president and CEO and founder of TechAccel. Michael, the floor is all yours.
Great. Thank you, Mary. It's good to be here and good to be talking about a very important and critical topic in the life cycle and advancement of innovation. So for the agenda today, I'll talk a little bit about this. We call it the Valley of Death, related to technologies getting from discovery to the marketplace and some of the challenges that are there and potentially some of the solutions. And then a little bit about TechAccel and our approach to addressing that challenge, that gap, that innovation gap, Valley of Death. And then we've got an awesome panel today, really top-notch people from a number of different areas. I'll introduce them here shortly after a few slides on TechAccel, and then we've got some questions that have been asked by folks that have registered for this that we will talk with the panel about as well. So with that, I'll move on, talk a little bit about the Valley of Death, or this innovation gap that exists. And if you look at this picture and kind of think of the left side of that bridge as where you might have a scientist that has a discovery that has this really truly transformative potential that's there. And then on the right side, you could think of an industry, multinational industry company that would take that technology to the marketplace. And the gap is sort of across that road between that discovery and when industry can take that technology to the marketplace. And it's filled with all kinds of roadblocks along the way. And it's really not about, people talk about research and development funding being reduced by the federal government, being reduced potentially by corporations because of consolidation and other purposes. It's not about that. It's really about sort of the non-economic investment that's made in these technologies early on, typically by the federal government, and really without the plan for where do we take it from here after we have that discovery, after we've developed that in that case. So that's what we're really talking about today. On this slide, I've got the life cycle of a technology, and really, if you think about it, if you look over on the left, you'll see basic research and development. So that's where discovery would occur. The next step would be you would prove out that discovery. So let's say it's a chemical for a potential drug for cancer treatment. The proof of concept would go into maybe mice or rats in terms of the study. And then as you move along this pathway, you move into target species, and in the case of what we're going to talk about today, you would think about food animal species or companion animal species, and then ultimately to the point where you're developing data for regulatory approval and going to the marketplace. And this Valley of Death, this gap is, again, just tends to occur in between that proof of concept and early development phase, where it's just too early and too risky for industry to deploy their capital typically in at that stage. Universities and institutions don't typically have a lot of capital to take a technology beyond that point. And so often those technologies sit and are stalled in that gap. And the green arrow there kind of shows you where TechAccel fits its model. And again, I will talk about that here briefly. And then there's really three areas where innovations like this reside. One is in industry where sometimes you have mergers and acquisitions, that you have large IP portfolios, intellectual property portfolios that come together, and the company has to decide which are the priorities for the company, and often many of those technologies can remain in their portfolio on the shelf, even though they have potential. Sometimes it's because they're too risky for the company to bring into their research and development portfolio, and other reasons. So that's one source. Another one is universities and research institutions, again, where you've exhausted that federal funding typically, and you don't have additional funding to fill that gap going forward. And then a third one that's unique is you have startup companies that have a very focused business plan around their platform or their technology, where there's opportunities to take that same platform or technology into new adjacent areas. So those are kind of the three areas that TechAccel, and I think the marketplace generally, looks at where technologies reside that have this underdevelopment environment where there's an opportunity to leverage on that. So just a little bit on TechAccel. We're very much a science organization, so we invest in science. We invest in closing that gap between where that discovery is and where it needs to be for industry really to take interest in it. And so our capital is patient capital, because science takes time. It's risky capital because 4 out of 5 technologies in that valley of death fail typically. So they're very early stage. So we invest very early stage in a technology, risk capital, patient capital, with the ultimate goal, though, of advancing those innovations to the point where they can become a viable product to go to the marketplace. So that's really what we're focused on, is putting capital in that gap, doing the research activity, de-risking and advancing the technology, and then ultimately working with a go-to-market partner. And the main reason, and this isn't new probably to anybody who's watching this today, is that we have a significant global food production system problem. We saw a lot of issues with the food supply chain via COVID, and a lot of the gaps and challenges that were there. I think that we have this opportunity that I think we're moving toward a revolution where innovation and agriculture and animal health are kind of coming together, and it's going to drive technologies and advancements that are truly next generation, that really are breakthrough in their potential to address this global problem that we're dealing with. And another, maybe a little bit more minor problem, but we'll talk about it today with one of our panelists from Elanco, is companion animals. There's a whole new world after COVID of how we look at, how we think, how we treat the issues we have with all of our companion animals at home. They've become a more significant part of the family, and the things that we're looking for to keep them happy and help them through situations like the COVID environment, because it's very different for them to have all of us at home, are also challenges that are there as well. And again, our model at TechAccel is to work on innovations that really are focused on addressing those kinds of issues with that problem statement. So our business model is basically, we have a very sophisticated way of sourcing technologies from those sources that I talked about. We then evaluate and advance those technologies using a network of research universities that we have one K-State represented here today. And then we work with a partner to monetize those technologies, to take them to the marketplace and have shared benefit economically with the partners. Our focus is very broad in terms of the areas of interest, and our panel actually represents several of these areas. So we look at crop standpoints from breeding and genetics to also protection, if you think about pesticides or environmental management, animal health and nutrition, grain processing and byproducts, and then also obviously food quality and safety, which again, we really got a feel for the importance of that as we went through a lot of the challenges with the COVID crisis, particularly early on, in terms of being able to keep food safe, get it distributed, and have the source of the food have ultimately a place to take the destination of that food. And then my last slide on TechAccel is probably one of the most unique parts of the company, is that we have a very diverse portfolio of assets. We make equity investments in startup companies, but we only do that, if you go back to my sources slide, we only do that where we can work with them to take their platform into a new adjacent swim lane, as we call it, a marketplace that maybe they haven't gotten into yet or not. And an example of that would be a company we've invested in that is an epigenetics company. It's the new generation of gene editing, and they're very focused on 2 crops, and we started 2 joint ventures with them in 2 different crop areas to take, again, that platform technology and broaden their portfolio and share monetarily with TechAccel. We have a lot of these proof of concept, I mentioned that earlier, assets that we brought inside in licensed technologies. So we just finished one the other day that it's a human health platform technology, drug discovery technology for human health for cancer. We just in-licensed it for animal health cancer, particularly in dogs, with a focus on being able to treat multiple different cancers in dogs with one drug discovery platform that we have there. So that would be an example of a technology that we've licensed into the company. We have 7 university master agreements. We have Kansas State University represented today, who was our first master agreement that we had. And that allows us to very rapidly and very efficiently be able to get research going at the universities to do our de-risking and to do our advancement research. I mentioned the joint ventures. We have 4 joint ventures and subsidiaries. Probably one of the most unique subsidiaries that's out there is one we formed with the Danforth Plant Science Center. We have them represented on the panel today as well. And that's an area that we're very interested in. It's called biopesticide-related research. So it's looking at having pesticides that are non-chemical, that are more environmentally friendly. They're RNA. If you've heard of RNA, you have it in your body. It's all around you. They're RNA-based, so very environmentally friendly, biodegradable, but very effective. And insects don't tend to have resistance to those technologies out there. So that would be an example where we formed a company with the Danforth Center around that biopesticide technology that they licensed into the company. So I'll stop there regarding TechAccel, and we'll move on to the panel. And we're going to get perspectives from academia, research, entrepreneurship, industry, and then also the investor perspective. So really a nice cross-section of knowledge and focus. Several of the panelists have multiple of these areas that they've had in their past, their background, and I not only want to thank them for the time they're taking today to be here to talk about this important innovation gap and how we're thinking about it and how we're addressing it, but also for all that they do to address that global challenge that I talked about. Each one of these individuals, in one way or the other, has often spent their career addressing those kinds of challenges at different environments. So with that, I'll quickly introduce the panel, and then we'll get on to a panel discussion. So the first panelist is Kent Glasscock, and Kent is the president of the Kansas State University Innovation Partnerships. He's also the president of Kansas State University's Research Foundation. In fact, Kent was in great part, along with me, one of the brainchilds of TechAccel back in 2014. And he has an outstanding perspective of kind of what I talked about with this challenge of taking their technologies and their developments and getting them to the marketplace and seeking those partners and seeking that funding. So we have Kent joining us today. We also have Tari Suprapto. She's joining us. She's with Elanco. She's senior advisor for external innovation at Elanco, which, again, if you think about those words of external innovation coming from the #2 animal health company in the world, that says they're really looking at unique models to advance technologies and work with partners with technology. She's had a long history of research, world-class research with organizations like Salk Institute and Rockefeller University. She's got a Ph.D. in cellular biology from Rockefeller University, and then also a BA from Swarthmore. So Tari will be joining us as well. Tom Laurita is joining us, and Tom brings a couple of different perspectives. Right now, his current position is Director of Entrepreneurship at the Danforth Plant Science Center. As I mentioned earlier, I believe it's the world's premier plant science center in existence. It's in St. Louis, Missouri. And Tom has been really brought in to elevate the research institution's way of looking at entrepreneurism and going to the marketplace. And so that's a critical new position. Prior to being there, Tom was president and CEO of New Leaf Symbiotics, which is one of the the darlings of the ag tech startup world. So he had a critical role with one of the companies that, and he can bring that perspective as well in terms of the role that New Leaf plays in the technology that they have going forward. Tom holds multiple degrees from Brown and from Yale, and is very proud of the fact that he was the first American citizen to get a Ph.D. from Russian People's Friendship University in Moscow. So that's a very unique, and again, Tom can bring us multiple perspectives. And then last is Michael Felman, and Michael is the president and CEO of MSF Capital Advisors, which is a multifamily office, but maybe even potentially more importantly, the advisory role that he plays to high net worth individuals, other family offices, in helping them with their investment portfolios and investment strategies. So again, he brings a perspective of what are the trends today, what are the family offices thinking about, and how does that interface with this particular group of sectors of agriculture, animal health, and food that we're talking about today. And as you can see here, Michael's won multiple awards and is commonly brought forward as a speaker or expert to provide guidance at conferences and various events. So with that, we'll go to the panel discussion. I've got some points that are up here on the slide that we're going to kind of talk around some of these things a bit and hopefully get into a good discussion within the panel around these. And as I said, after that, we will go to a Q&A session based on questions that were submitted with us today. So maybe I'll start. Kent, I might start with you. So again, Kent is with Kansas State University and essentially runs their commercialization, innovation, and research foundation operations. So he has a very strong perspective of what the universities provide, but also the challenges that they face when it comes to this innovation gap. So Kent, maybe if you could just talk a little about what those challenges are at the university, and maybe what K-State is doing to look at those and address those. That would be great. And then I think, Tom, I'll kind of get the same perspective from you from the Danforth Center in terms of the fact that you are a premier research institution with discoveries coming out on an annual basis, and how are you thinking about partnering and models related to making sure that those discoveries get to the marketplace. So, Kent, why don't we start with you on that focus area?
The universities, public research universities in this country occupy a unique position in terms of the global ecosystem in this area. The challenges for public research universities is that they are heavy on basic research. Federally funded research is almost uniformly basic research. Public universities create lots of innovation, and shops like mine at Kansas State University attempt to get the most innovative science into the global marketplace, but we have tremendous challenges. And the challenges focus on the difference in a value proposition of basic research innovation and the value proposition of that same innovation once the science has been validated and advanced to the point of a readiness level that the go-to-market partners can see as risky but doable. So I think the brilliance of the TechAccel model is it goes to the heart of public research universities' problems, which is there's money for basic research, innovation occurs. The money for advancement of science and validation of that science, even the most promising, is ultimately terribly scarce. And so from our perspective, and I think I speak for every university in the country, the TechAccel model of identifying the most promising research, identifying a path to the global marketplace, and then connecting the research to the global marketplace through science advancement is exactly what is needed. And universities all across this country, and indeed around the world, have exactly the same problem.
Great. Thanks, Kent, for that and a great answer. So, Tom, maybe over to you from the Danforth Plant Center environment. And again, noting your title and your relatively new hire there. So obviously the Danforth Center is really thinking about this next phase of where their technologies need to go. So maybe if you could share with us kind of what you're thinking about in terms of the go forward models for that innovation gap that we talked about. And of course, we share a fantastic relationship. For those of you watching, our science team is actually resident in the Danforth Center, so they are true partners in doing what we're doing, and in addition to what they're doing in improving the human condition through plants and crops. So, Tom?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Kent, I certainly agree that what you've described is a universal problem or challenge in universities and research institutions. I was recruited to the Danforth Center less than a year ago, previously having been the CEO of a venture-funded startup company in the plant science or ag tech area. So I know of what I speak in terms of the challenges of that process. The company that I founded has done a D round, so that's fairly advanced. Our products in the market, but there are many challenges with getting basic technology through that system. So I agree with the premise that Michael has described, and what TechAccel is trying to do, I think, is very important. At the Danforth Center, there is sort of a unique mission, and it is a little bit different from a public university, although most of the research that is done at Danforth does have government or some sort of public funding. The center itself, the mission that Dr. Danforth, the founder, imbued in the center is to try to have an impact. So you've got basic research, and then you've got how does that get to the market. And the Danforth Center is different from a public university in that it is able to take steps that would advance technologies, including even starting up companies itself as a not-for-profit. So that's really what I'm doing there at the Danforth Center as Director of Entrepreneurship, is identifying technologies that have promise, trying to make sure that we understand, okay, what's it going to take for that to get to the market? And Danforth is working, I would say, quite diligently now, has hired an innovation team, and really wants to deliver on that third mission point. So as Michael mentioned, TechAccel, that model is one possibility for Danforth to do that. We are actually working on other ways that we can get that technology out, because there's lots of opportunity. There are some companies that have spun out of Danforth that have done quite well. Benson Hill is one example. So I think the COVID situation that we're all facing, and the fact that we've got to speed up that process that Kent is describing, really speaks to the importance of bridging this gap and coming up with new ways to get basic science out quicker. I mean, if you look at how quickly the mRNA vaccine got out the door, when we want to do it, we can do it. And when we need to do it, we can do it. And I think we are in a situation with climate and the environment and food security where we need to do that.
Great. Thanks, Tom. And Tari, let's switch over to you. So you have an external innovation role with one of the leading animal health companies out there. For those of you in the audience out there, Elanco became public, did an IPO just a few years ago, very successful raise in the IPO, significantly more than they had anticipated, and then more recently acquired the animal health division of Bayer. And not long ago acquired the animal health division of Novartis as well. So they have really accumulated a significant amount of capability and assets on both the food production animal side and the companion animal side of things. And Tari's here because she has that focus on thinking about external innovation and how does Elanco partner with outside entities like TechAccel and others as well. So maybe Tari, get it from your perspective the other way around so Kent and Tom talked about the challenges at Danforth and at K-State in terms of, the stranded or stalled innovations that are there. How is Elanco looking at, the stage of those innovations, partnerships with those institutions, and is there opportunities to maybe for an Elanco to come a little earlier on a technology, or partner with organizations like TechAccel that are willing to take that risk in that sort of going from A to B in that that valley of death? So maybe coming from the other angle of a multinational company, how are you looking at that gap and ways of addressing that at Elanco?
That's a really good, awesome question. And, from the animal health farmer perspective, one of the reasons why I came over to Elanco is because I actually experienced when I was on Kent's side of the table, I was actually very successful in getting Elanco to take on an early stage academic-based technology. And in fact, they were platforms that were focused more towards human health and origin. And together with some creative thinking and open-mindedness and quite a bit of elbow grease, literally and figuratively, we were able to pivot it towards an animal health application. So coming into Elanco's External Innovation Group, that's one of the things that I look at. I don't only look at the startups that are formed or the small companies that are formed solely with the animal health focus, but I also survey the human health landscape from academia, from startups, from biotech, and human pharma as well, because there is a very potential strong pool of assets, technology platforms, capabilities, where if we partner it just right, we can potentially really move the needle in a number of areas. The challenges are, especially when we look at going from human health to animal health, or even from the animal health startup, is that there aren't as many of them in the animal health, the animal health startups compared to the human health, right? If you just kind of look at the sheer numbers, we're just a smaller market. And that comes hand in hand with a smaller number of investment entities that are willing to go into animal health. There's way more in terms of the human health investor. But there is a serious need and a driver here. And I think COVID has definitely shown a very bright light on the necessity of food animals, of companion animals, as well as the health of the planet. It all goes hand in hand, which is why there's this whole big global One Health initiative. So we're right there, point and center. I can go into way much further detail, but I think you've got many more questions. So if I haven't addressed anything in particular, so a lot of the challenges is that smaller market, less parties to play with. Convincing the human health focused startup to partner with animal health is an effort in itself. We like looking at the early stage stuff, but we also look at the late stage stuff. And especially when we look at early stage, that's where, looking at an alliance with an entity like TechAccel or others is potentially quite valuable, because if I see something where Elanco says, hey, this is a little bit too early, or we need data in the target species because we're coming from human health, I'm going to talk to you and ask you, how can we make this, from an idea into a reality? Let's work together to get, to give this a chance.
Great response, Tari. I appreciate that. So Michael, let's move on to you and talk about it more from the investor and family office perspective. So maybe a two-part question, kind of springboarding off of what Tari talked about. Are you seeing trends of family offices moving more toward interest in agriculture, and in particular, and to Tari's point, into animal health, even being that it's a smaller market than traditional human health, life sciences type investments that lots of family offices have been in for a long time? So are you seeing movement in that direction, maybe around sustainability, ESG, environment, impact investing, and that this is a place where that can occur? So maybe that's the first part, is, are you seeing that trend? And then the second piece being, what is the risk profile of most of the offices, your multifamily office, but the ones you work with, in terms of their interest and willingness to look at these sort of higher risk upstream technologies? I mean, TechAccel has 13 family office investors who have come into this knowing they have to have patient capital, that it's high risk capital. But I'm curious if you're seeing that trend. So really the trends around, ag and animal health, is there movement in that direction, not away from human health, but to complement human health that's going out there? And then also that sort of earlier stage of technology, what's the temperature of the family offices you're working with to kind of get into that patient risk capital type environment?
Yeah. So before I answer those questions, I just wanted to comment on what Kent has been speaking. All of you have been speaking in the challenges. I'm part of an organization that deals exactly with this issue in a different sector, and the issue to me really is government grants, whether it's NIH or DARPA or BARPA or whatever government agency that you're dealing with, they typically come in and finance what I would call basic research, right? And then in many circumstances, the government could actually be a client or customer of that particular technology. But what government can't do is they can't commercialize your technology, right? And so that's to me where there's a big challenge, right? Is how do you get through, and maybe with your group, Kent, how do you get to that next step where you've gotten government grants, you've been able to do some basic research, and now you're trying to get it to a point where that technology can become commercialized. I think the second point is and this is now more from an investor's point of view, and then I'll get to your specific questions. One of the things we look for as an investor is how does the company change from a pure, what I would call R&D company, to a sales and marketing company? How do they actually show market fit, right? Because, as an investor, we are not just looking for pure R&D plays. That tends to be either in our philanthropy endeavors or something else. And so I think that's another key. How does a company pivot from a pure R&D play to a sales and marketing company with still strong R&D? That's still the secret sauce of the company. But where I've seen companies fail is making that transition. It's not an easy transition that every company does successfully. In fact, I think most of them don't do it well. So that's my two comments on the challenges. As far as on the investment side and what are family offices looking for, we believe that in our group, I obviously can't speak for everyone, but our group, agricultural technology, food technology, somewhat on the animal health is a very major concern for our group. We have a number of operations in those fields. We think from an ESG, we think that's, if we can find technologies that can reduce the use of water, the use of fertilizers, food safety, which you mentioned is huge. How can we, given what happened with COVID, how can food be more secure and more safe throughout the supply chain? Some of the other areas that we've been focused on is drones, the use of drones in agriculture, the use of even satellites. If you're talking about agriculture, you have to also talk about flooding, droughts, and particularly with climate change, you're seeing those incidents of weather activity becoming more and more severe. And how does that affect agriculture and farming in particular? The use of sensors in ag technology is another big area that we've looked at and we've invested in. And then finally, an area that I don't think gets as much news is what I call food waste. How can we reduce food waste, not only in this country, but around the world? And so that actually gets more into a logistics and a inventory technology, which you may not think about when you discuss these subjects, but is really critical in being able to reduce waste of food, which is a tremendous problem, I believe, in the world.
Great. Thanks, Michael, and absolutely agree with all pieces of that. So maybe, Kent, I'll go back to you. We've got a few minutes left for the panel discussion, and maybe you could talk more specifically about kinds of the things that K-State is doing to try to interface with organizations like Tari. So your organization has evolved significantly. I've watched it evolve over the last probably 10 or 12 years in terms of words like venture and commercialization, things being on business cards within your institution. Maybe, I know you sit on a lot of panels, I know you sit on a lot of committees. Can you talk about what you're seeing in sort of the national trends for universities? Are the majority of them still struggling with, how to interface with an Elanco like Tari's organization, even if they've set up sort of that external innovation, et cetera, to really get that culture of entrepreneurship within the institution? Because you see, I've seen several situations, I know you and I have talked about it, where commercializing innovation at an academic institution may not be part of the formula to get tenure. And if it's not part of the formula to get tenure at the institution, it's not prioritized in the way that a faculty member is really going to be thinking about it, at least with the majority of the core basic academic researchers. So, those kinds of fundamental elements of the academy, having that in place to be able to spur that entrepreneurship is critical. So maybe you could talk from sort of a broader perspective, but are universities getting better at it? Is the current situation with COVID and obviously tuition and, funding from state and federal, all the strains that the institutions are feeling, is that having a negative impact on sort of that piece of the business versus the basic core academy type lecturing and classes? So kind of where does commercialization, entrepreneurship sit sort of in the broader university environment? And maybe an example or two of what you guys are doing at K-State to address that.
Certainly. Thank you, Michael. There are tremendous challenges. And part of the challenge is that universities tend not to be market focused. And at K-State, over the course of the last 10 or 12 years, as you note, Michael, we have begun to focus very heavily on the marketplace, where the marketplace is going. And in our areas of research strength, who are the companies, the institutions that have the capacity to go to the marketplace, and what are they thinking? So in the last number of years, we have staffed way up in terms of liaisons between Kansas State University and select strategic corporate partners that have a national and global reach. And we believe that's important because that bridge from our benchtop to the end user is a very long bridge indeed. And universities can't cross that bridge very successfully. All universities are trying to become more adept at corporate engagement. But part of the problem and part of the hindrance at public universities is that faculty, because of tenure, don't have to do anything they don't want to do. And a whole raft of those faculty members, particularly researchers, don't care about the global marketplace. And the last thing they want to do is to interact with a major company. So what we've done is we have reached out around the country and around the world to establish more strategic relationships with companies and then connect them not to the entire research enterprise of Kansas State University, but those researchers who care about getting their innovation into the global marketplace for humankind good and monetary advancement. And it's probably only about 10% of our key researchers who care about that, and they tend to be younger folk.
Are they incentivized? Do they have a financial incentive beyond tenure, but is there a financial incentive at the institution to commercialize technologies?
commercialization is not a part of tenure. And so there's sort of this lockout period where we've actually had young researchers say to us, come back when I get tenure. And then I'll engage the global marketplace. But I think that there is an incentive on the part of particularly younger research faculty in terms of wanting the pride, wanting the knowledge of going to the marketplace. We also, as do all public universities, share the income derived from innovation going to the marketplace with faculty and faculty team members. At Kansas State University, that is 25% that goes to the faculty, and we have had faculty that have made a boatload of money. And that's really helpful because other faculty members look at that. And you can say the academy is all a bunch of airheads, but the capitalist system works, including at public research universities. And so from our perspective, we make these assumptions, and then we have structured around those assumptions.
Great. Thanks for that, Kent. So we'll move on from the panel discussion and go on to about 15 minutes of Q&A with questions. And I've got my paper in front of me with the questions, some of the questions that have been submitted. They tend to be a little bit specific, but Tari, I'm going to bounce over to you. So one of the questions is, can you address the opportunities and challenges of repurposing human drugs for animal and vice versa? They mentioned nutrition and diagnostics, but just I would say in general, what are the opportunities and challenges? And interesting that the question is going both ways, going from animal drugs potentially that would be of value to humans based on their performance, but also those human drugs for animals. So what are some of the challenges and opportunities that Elanco sees relative to that?
Sure. Again, another really great question. And I would say that primarily today, currently, as we see a lot, and I think I'd mentioned this earlier, was about going to human health and leveraging or translating it into animal health. And one of the biggest challenges that we see is that it often requires re-engineering and modification. For example, I'll use antibodies. An antibody that's been developed for human health will often require fairly extensive re-engineering in order for it to be compatible with the immune system of your target species, be it dog, be it cow, et cetera. Okay, so there is always going to be, more often than not, that work element. And that work element is actually best done in collaboration, because you have to pull in that expertise from your partner and combine it with the expertise of Elanco's research teams in order to create this product. A direct repurposing, I've certainly seen my share of those. And again, things that are developed for human health aren't always shelf ready, for lack of a better word, for animal health, right? It's not just switching the packaging and the color of the package or changing the brand name, although that is a strategy for something that, but those are really rare where you can get that, right? The regulatory paths, while there are similarities, there are definitely differences as well. And these are the kind of things where both parties have to be willing to be open and very communicative and very transparent about that's how we bridge, right? And then be willing to put in the work to build that bridge. And it can be very expensive. When we're talking about biologics, also cell therapies, antibodies, etc., we're talking about manufacturing. And we know in the human health space, it's a bit of an issue. It doesn't, and certainly means it is potentially going to be an issue in the animal health space. For the other way, we don't see so much nowadays. We used to see it for like parasiticides and fungicides. I think we are seeing a little bit of it. But antiparasitics in human health, not a big demand right now, right? But the antiviral thing is interesting, but I think it's going more since things are moving so quickly in this, in these COVID times. We're actually watching to see what the technology is doing, right? In the mRNA vaccine space, for instance, and thinking, how can we use those learnings, right? In all honesty, human health just moves so much faster in terms of research, the breakthroughs and the innovation. So we have to do a little bit of that creative thinking. Little comment on diagnostics. Our biggest issue is things that are developed for human health when you want to pivot to human health, what's the cost? How convenient is it going to be to the end user? It could be the pet owner, it could be the farmer, or the vet, right? And how does that fit in with the practices today? We have to put it into that context. And of course, there's the typical issues of accuracy, sensitivity, what biomarkers are we measuring? So I'll stop there.
Just a curious question. The audience may or may not know that a lot of the animal health companies like Tari's were actually spun out from human health companies. So Eli Lilly and Company spun out Elanco, which is actually Eli Lilly and Company as an acronym. Pfizer spun out Zoetis. Do you still interact with, I understand sort of, corporately separated and those kinds of things, but from a research perspective, do you still see an appetite with those human health companies to engage with animal health companies? Are they moving, do you think, sort of in two different directions based on kind of some of the challenges that you talked about that are there?
Are you talking specifically about our parent or just human health pharma?
Yeah, I think the fact that that most of you came from a parent human health company would lead one to believe that there is a constant interaction and things moving in different directions. And you just described how challenging that is. Do you see in general that the large human health companies are still paying a lot of attention to animal health? And one of the reasons I ask this is that, and I know you've seen it and others have seen it, there's a lot of private equity, private capital organizations that have been, with billions of dollars under management that have been life sciences, human health focused for a long period of time, who are now coming to the animal health conferences and seeing what's there and where they can partner, even though they're on a much smaller scale. As you said, the markets are much smaller than the human health markets, but you're still seeing, private capital money and big money looking around to see what the opportunities are in animal health. And I guess I'm asking, are you seeing the human health companies still kind of sticking around a bit to kind of see what you're up to, or do you really think that there's a pretty healthy gap there today in terms of that interfacing in general?
Okay, so my party line to that is some are and some aren't. Those that have recently divested are most likely not watching as closely and focusing more on their human health. I will say that there are human health pharma companies that are interested in being able to leverage certain assets for an animal health application, and there have certainly been conversations around those. It is probably more opportunistic than strategic, and of course, we are one of the biggest principles we have in Elanco External Innovation is to always take the first conversation, and it's a very good lesson to have.
See where it goes. Okay, good party line. Well done. So Tom, let's move on to you. So one of the questions that came in here is, are there solutions that can help improve crops, yield, nutrition without genetic modification or GMO solutions? And maybe I'll make one comment, Tom, and then let you maybe talk a little bit about, the company you created by example, or where else you want to go with relative to Danforth around that. So I had mentioned it earlier that Tom's organization and mine had created what's called Renaissance Ag is the name of the company, and it is a biopesticide technology that was licensed out of the Danforth Center into Renaissance Ag with that objective of being able to have something that is more environmentally friendly. The pesticides are species specific, so it's not this broad cast of chemicals and you're taking out butterflies and moths and all these non-target species. It's very specific to individual species that you're pursuing, and it's very controlled in the way it goes in the environment. And as I mentioned earlier, it's environmental friendly, and insects form resistance to a lot of agricultural chemicals out there, and we do not believe that same level of resistance is going to form around these RNA-based biopesticides. So that would be one example of a non-GMO related way of dealing with crop health, crop nutrition, et cetera. But Tom, maybe I'll ask you to talk a little bit about, maybe comment on, kind of Newleaf's core technology of the company that you started, or the microbe environment in general. But we could go for an hour on this topic, maybe give a couple of examples of some of the things that are going on that are moving away from genetic modification and still providing those same values around yield and nutrition that the question came in on.
Right. Well, that's a very good question. I mean, the short answer to the question is yes. There are plenty of opportunities to transform the way we grow food that are not GMO technology. GMO technology transformed farming, as we know, all over the world. But there's a strong push now, both in the startup community and the research community, as well as in industry, to move away from that. So the company that I co-founded and of which I was CEO is Newleaf Symbiotics. Newleaf Symbiotics is a company that's focused on a specific type of bacteria that colonize all plants naturally. So they're already out there in the environment. We've never seen a plant that is not colonized by this particular type of bacteria. And there are tens of thousands of different variants of the bacterium that we have studied and we've sequenced the genome of. So I think the short answer there is this is something that's already in nature. These bacteria are symbiotic with plants, and they are helping the plant live and grow and protect itself. So this is a technology, and there are many other biologics companies now in the world looking at how can the naturally occurring microbiome be useful in farming and in protecting plants. So, I mean, that's clearly a technology that is growing, that works. Now, it's not simple. All the discussions earlier, production and finding the right application methodology, moving from R&D to sales and marketing, all of those challenges exist. But this is really a new field. And I think that one of the real drivers for the development of these kinds of technologies is people don't want to eat food with chemicals all over it. I mean, I know my family doesn't, and everyone I know doesn't. And that's really become a strong driver for the development of these new technologies. There's no doubt in my mind that these technologies can be as effective as the chemical technologies or the GM technologies we have, or they can certainly be symbiotic with or additive to what's out there. So that's a really active field of development in agriculture. And I think that this discussion is apt because the technologies are there. We know they work. That doesn't mean we're there yet. So there's plenty of opportunity for investment in these fields. But it's happening. It's happening. And the big companies know it, and they're looking for which are going to be the breakout technologies. At the same time, they're making money and doing what they do today. So there's a transitional process that's going to have to go on in agriculture. And as you know, production agriculture is highly concentrated, certainly in row crops right now in a few companies. So that's another issue you've got to understand. As Kent and Michael were talking about how you translate R&D into the field. You've got to understand the environment. There have been a lot of mergers in agriculture recently, so that's driving some changes in the way big ag looks at these technologies. So short answer is yes, it's absolutely doable, and I think it is the future that we're going to see a different way of farming in the near future.
Great. Thanks, Tom, and congratulations on your Newleaf Symbiotics success. It's a great company, a darling of ag tech's world. So we'll do one more question, Michael. I'll go to you, and then we'll close out this Q&A piece. Kind of received two questions, Michael, around family offices and impact investing. There's a general question about the role of impact investing in ag tech, and we kind of talked about that a little bit earlier around what you're seeing, but that general trend of including ag tech and animal health, you said to a lesser extent maybe animal health in that impact investing. But then interestingly, another question that came in is are you seeing differences in the relevance of that kind of impact investing with different generations in a family office? So within those generations, as it's passed down, are you seeing increases in focus on impact investing that might include agriculture, or are you seeing decreases, or is the trend that it's just moving from one generation to the next and same old kind of thing?
Oh no, it's clearly there's a trend in the next generation to do more in impact investing or, environmentally friendly, sustainable investing. I mean, my son, who's a next gen, kind of heads up all our ag and food investments in that space. But I also look at it from a business perspective, in that that our if we can reduce the use of resources, right, and we can be more efficient in the use of resources, well, that goes to the bottom line, right? I mean, this is an industry. The agricultural industry is an industry that's not, from a margin perspective, is not like a software company, right? If you're talking about farming row crops, or it's a very low margin industry. And so if you can be more efficient and use technology, if you can be more sustainable and use less resources, that's going to go to in my opinion, going to go to the bottom line. Another area that I think on the sustainable and impact, which we haven't really talked too much about, which is related to farming, is bioplastics or biopolymers, reducing single-use plastics and using bio kind of like natural bio materials, and that's a huge problem in the environment with single-use plastics. And we're seeing a lot of innovation, a lot of investment going into substitutes. And I think from a ESG impact space, we all know about that out in the ocean there in the Pacific, where it's bigger than I think it's bigger than the size of Manhattan, where it's just almost an island of trash. And I think that technology and using less petroleum-based materials is certainly an area for investment, and is an area that particularly families are interested in.
Great, thank you. So you are seeing that next generation down, just like with your son, but in the other family offices, that this is getting an increasingly heightened level of interest in the impact investing side of things.
No question about it. Absolutely.
Yeah, good. That's great to hear. Okay, well, I want to thank all four panelists. Great discussion, great answers. Covered a nice, in a short period of time, had a nice swath of different aspects of the importance of technology and making sure it gets commercialized and out of the hands of the discoverers and into the hands of the multinational companies, and investment dollars like Michael's organizations are needed to make that happen. So I want to thank you all for participating again. And Mary, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you all for sharing these great insights and for being so generous with your time today. A reminder to look out for an email within the next 2 hours with links to download today's material. We'd also like your feedback, so if you could take a minute to answer our very brief survey that will pop up on your screen at the end of the session, that would be very much appreciated. And now, on behalf of TechAccel and Marcus Evans Online Event, we would like to thank you all for joining us, and we do hope that you will be listening in at our next event. Have a good day.